My name's Joe, and I'm going to celebrate this anniversary that has nothing to do with me by making a few of the different plants from Plants vs. Zombies. I was at Michael's one day when I found these very cute and tiny pots, and I figured I could make a few cute and equally tiny plants to go in them. I first made an oval out of my coral wool in order to make this somewhat firm puck. I then could use this puck and wrap some brown wool around it in order to make the top part of the head. Once the initial layer of brown was there, I then added some darker brown just to give it a bit of extra shading. The sunflower is obviously one of the most important plants. It's what your main source of sunlight is going to be in order to make the rest of your army. And I feel like it's actually really useful just to not use walnuts and just use sunflowers, because at least they also produce extra sun for you, so you can just replace them faster. Of course, garden warfare is a different game, so this advice isn't fully hold up there, but it's still useful to have sunflowers. Here I'm felting at a very low angle to make sure the two colors blend in together more. And once I have a fairly nice gradient instead of a solid line, I can begin to work on the petals. Using yellow wool, I'm going to make some small triangles, which I can then attach to the actual head. Here's one, but one isn't enough, so here's a few more. And I made them a bit small, but you can very easily fix this by making a couple of them that are a bit larger. Now that I have the larger petals and my sunflower isn't going to be balding, I then have to figure out the orientation. This is alright, but I didn't love it. Try moving it around. No. That could work. Yeah, alright, we'll attach them here. I first started putting down the smaller petals along the flat side of the back of the head, which probably isn't the right spot, but you'll see what I mean later. I spread them out properly, and then between those I started to lay out the larger petals. That way they would properly cascade and give it a bit more volume in its hair. Or petals. You know, mane? I guess it's a mane. Now I made sure that they would stay attached, but they're not super in there. I did move a few of them after the fact, but as long as you don't purposely try ripping the petals out, they stay in there just fine. When deciding what kind of face the sunflower should have, I had a few options. There's the original look from the first game, there's the updated 3-dimensional garden warfare look, and there's also another one that I didn't know about, but there's a lot of pictures of it on Google. I decided to make one that is closer to the 2009 version, partially because I found this plushie and it looked like it was cute, so I was going to do that. I grabbed some black wool and laid out the two eyes on the front of the face. Once I actually installed the eyes, it looked a bit soulless, so I figured I should add in the highlights. So, once the black was there, I took some white wool, I pulled it into tiny strands, and then added an upper highlight and a lower highlight into both of the eyes. Now it's these tiny details that really makes needle felting work come alive, but it is a bit finicky. Once that was done, I took some black wool and started laying out their nice little smile. Here's where the two different types of sunflowers were actually blended together, because I then added in the smile lines to denote where the cheeks are, sort of like in garden warfare. And once her cheeks were fully finished, I could then work on the tongue. I took some pink wool, that's too pink actually. I took some reddish orange wool and added a tiny tongue sticking out in the bottom of his mouth. And with that tongue finished, I can begin working on the body, or in this case, the stem. I wanted this plant to be able to sit up in the pot I got, so I'm going to use this pipe cleaner. That's a bit too long. I'm going to fold a pipe cleaner in half, take some green wool, wrap it around the pipe cleaner, and then needle felt the green wool down in order to make a somewhat solid stem. Now, I don't actually know if this is what you're meant to do. I'm not fully good at using wires, but it worked out pretty well in the end. Needle felting needles are strong, but they're pretty brittle, so you generally have to make sure not to hit something hard. This is one of my thicker needles, so it meant if I accidentally hit the wire inside, it wasn't actually that bad. Once the stem had a somewhat matte appearance, I then had to attach it to the head. Using some more green wool, I laid out a blob towards the back of the neck and then felted it down, making sure to pass my needle through the stem and the head just to make sure it stayed. Pretty soon it was fully attached, so I can begin working on the leaves of the sunflower. I just took some green wool, formed it into a rough leaf shape, and then made sure to felt it down again and again because I don't want it coming apart. Now what I'm doing is called needle felting because you're essentially making felt. That means I could have just used felt, but I didn't have any green felt, and you know what? Part of this is the fun of just stabbing something about 100 million times because this takes a while. After a while, I had 4 leaves for this project, and I now have to attach them to the stem. With a slight issue, there's a metal wire in that stem. Now, looking around at them, I figured that the easiest way would be to felt them into it one by one, taking the 2 smaller leaves, putting them towards the top. That way, when it's fully spread out, the 2 bigger leaves kind of cover the stem up. With the leaves fully attached to the stem, I can finally look at the full sunflower. And he's kind of balding at the top, but it's fine since the pot is tiny and I'm having it sit far away from me. With that finished, I can begin working on the next plant, which chronologically was the first one, the Peashooter. Since you know how making the body goes, we're going to speed through this. Once they're together, I'm going to take a mixture of a few different greens and wrap it around the Peashooter. I'm using a few greens because I want to give it a bit of extra texture. The Garden Warfare version has quite a bit of skin-like things on it. It's got lumps and stuff. I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to make it visually, via color, different. Once it was fully colored, I had to make the actual shooter part of the Peashooter different. I was going to go with black like in the game, but I figured a darker green might look less strange because, it wouldn't really be black in real life. It'd probably, if anything, should be a darker version of the outer color. I'm not sure that was right, but it's what I did. Once that was finished, I took some green wool and made it into a little leaf, and then I attached that leaf to the back of the head. I made sure to attach the leaf, and it's in there pretty firmly, but again, if you were to tear at it, it probably would come out. But why would you do that? You're not a zombie. Once the first leaf was in place, I took some black wool and again laid out the initial eye in the Peashooter. Now I kept this one a bit 3-dimensional. I could have made sure to felt it down flat, but I figured having it pop out of it gives it a bit more depth and makes it look more interesting. And once that first one was in, I then added a second one. With the head completed, I then did the same thing as earlier to make this stem. I took some green wool, wrapped it around the pipe cleaner, and then felted that down. Now this time I did do something different. I figured I could try attaching the leaves first. Does that make any material change? Not really, but it was interesting. So I made 4 more leaves out of some green wool. And again, I just want you to remember, these take a while. So if you ever request something and it ends up being a bit before I make it, I am trying to get to them. Just to let you know. After some time, I finished the first leaf, which means I could make 3 more. And once I had those 3, I could attach them to the stem. This time I figured I could attach the 2 leaves to each other first. And once they were attached, I could spread them open, take the stem, and then embed the stem into the 2 leaves. I don't actually know if this is adding any more stability or support, but I don't know, it was fun. Once those 2 leaves were attached, I then took the other 2 and felted them down perpendicular to the first. That way when it's spread out, the leaves would fully cover the bottom. With this finished, I could then attach it to the head. I left a little bit of an extra lip up at the top. That way I have some extra wool to felt down into the head. Attaching it was fairly simple. Like everything needle felting, you just keep stabbing. Pretty soon, I had a finished Peashooter, which means I can move on to the next plant. The cherry I don't know if I can say that on YouTube. I'm not monetized. I can say whatever I want. I'm gonna make the cherry bomb. This one is a bit different. Someone asked me to make some coasters. A lovely viewer of mine. So I'm gonna make these as flat needle felt projects. I started by taking a piece of felt, putting that into an embroidery hoop. Not really to use it for embroidery, mainly so I had a circle to cut out later. And then afterwards, I started adding in green wool to simulate the background lawn. Now this, as it turns out, will be a problem later, but we'll get to that when we get to that. After I had the initial green set up, I then started laying out the first outer layer of red for the cherry bomb. Truth be told, felting a 2D object, at least the way I'm doing it here, is fairly simple. It's kind of just like drawing with, let's say, anything colored, so a marker or a crayon. Which means I'm going to talk about other stuff and just let it play on in the background. So, over the 16 years of Plants vs. Zombies lifetime, the story has gotten very interesting. From the first game, you would imagine Crazy Dave, for example, just to be, some weirdo crazy guy, but he's actually a super genius who now controls an army of plants to fight Dr. Zomboss, and he can time travel. Because the zombie doctor can also time travel. The second game's weird. Garden Warfare is also weird, and I guess the first one, but I suppose I can accept the fact that an individual would plant these plants in their lawn to defend against zombies more than the idea that the zombies and plants are at a war. It's just a bit weird. Looking at the Plants vs. Zombies wiki a bit, just to, make sure I'm not saying anything super out there, apparently there's a third game. I'm not even going to look up what happens in the third game, but there's a third regular Plants vs. Zombies. What else could they do? They already went to the past, and the future, and the Wild West, and the pirate times. I played the second one a lot, actually, even though I don't like it as much as the first. Go figure. Let me know in the comments which one of the Plants vs. Zombies is your favorite, and which version of Crazy Dave is the craziest, because I'm amazed he's a war criminal, maybe? Like, are you allowed to make bombs like this as a private individual? Is he a king? I mean, he could be. He can time travel. He is a genius, and he has a weird van. A van that can fly, kind of like the battle bus, and it makes you wonder, did Fortnite copy Plants vs. Zombies? I don't know, maybe. I assume if there was some copying, they would have sued by now, so probably not. I feel like Plants vs. Zombies is one of those games that's so simple and so interesting that a lot of things end up copying it. It's not the same as nowadays, where when there's a successful game like Lethal Company, then 16 other games like it are made. It was a different time back then, I think. Probably not in retrospect, but I'm not going to look it up. So I suppose in that way, it makes sense that certain things from Plants vs. Zombies would just naturally spread out to other games. Heading back to the actual build, you may be noticing something a bit strange. Looking at this, you can probably tell you can't really see the leaves compared to the lawn, and that was a mistake. But I figured, you can see it better in real life, and in this camera angle, it's not that easy to see the difference between the colors. In this one, you kind of can. Now that I'm finished with the cherry bomb, I'm taking this out of the embroidery hoop so I can make the next plant. After I take it out, again, I mainly use it to get this round circle. So I can then cut it out along the edge to get a perfectly circular coaster. Is it actually a perfect circle? Not really, but it's a lot closer than if I try to freehand it, which is the main reason I use the embroidery hoop. Looking at it, it should work just fine as a coaster, but I'm not done yet. I'm going to make one more plant, the potato mine. While the walnut is technically next, it's just a circle. I didn't think it'd be that interesting, so if you want to see me make it, let me know in the comments. For now though, I did the same thing as earlier by putting the felt sheet into the hoop, and then put down the layer of green. Luckily, the potato mine is not also green, so I'm not really risking it blending into the background too much. Once I had the solid foundation of green in place, I could then start putting out a mixture of a light apricot wool as well as some brown to make the initial shape of the spud. When needle felting, it's easier to add more wool on versus take wool off, so upon realizing it wasn't big enough, I added a final layer of the brown and cream towards the bottom, which means I can now start adding in the dirt that is pushed up once the mine breaches the ground and is armed and ready. When I added this brown in, I realized fairly quickly that it's just going to blend in too much together, so I added a secondary dark coffee colored brown just to make it stick out a bit more. Since the rest of this is fairly self-explanatory, how about we talk about the music of the original Plants vs. Zombies? It is probably up there for me for the most memorable soundtracks, and is really weird considering it's a mobile game. Well, it started off as one, kind of. I feel like mobile games nowadays aren't looked at in very high regard, but this one, very obviously, was a standout. My personal favorite has always been Moon Grain's Balloon Bloom is also fun. But let me know what your favorite soundtrack is. I feel like one of the marks of having a really good soundtrack is the fact people want to remix it. For example, there's a fairly famous jazz version of the entire Plants vs. Zombies OST, which is very good, and I recommend listening to it if you're ever doing something mindless, kind of like this. And recently, I say recently, but I think it was posted a while ago, I even saw a horror take on it, which made the music all creepy, which I think is a classic standard of every online fandom. And I feel like, especially when you end up with horror universe things in general, it's a sign that the fandom is doing pretty well, and is still going strong. And of course, we cannot forget the all-time classic, There's Zombies on Your Lawn, which is really weird hearing the plants that you just saw getting mauled to death start singing. But I think it humanizes them, just like the Almanac, which is a crazy read, by the way. I highly recommend looking it up online and just looking at all the different descriptions, because they range from really interpersonal problems to just random anecdotes. It's perfect, and I love it. Frankly, I feel like more games should incorporate an in-game almanac that just weirdly humanizes the creatures in it, because it's very funny to read. Anyway, with the potato mine's face finished, I added in a couple of brown spots just to give it a bit more texture, maybe like the dirt is still hanging on top of them. And with that, I think we're finished. Which means I can finally start to take out the potato mine from the embroidery hoop. Freeing him from the bamboo, I think it's bamboo, prison cell, I can now cut him out. Once again, using the hoop mainly to get a circle for this coaster. And I think he looks better than the cherry bomb. But let me know what you think in the comments. But I suppose we should look at all of them one last time, just so you can decide which one is your favorite. Whether you watched it the whole way through or just skipped to the end, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, let me know which one's your favorite, let me know what your favorite song is from Plants vs. Zombies, and let me know what I should make next, all in the comments. From one of my other videos, I know a lot of people left comments, and I've only gotten to a few of them, but don't worry, I have them all written down, and I am attempting to get through them in my own time. These videos take a while to make, so I hope you really just enjoy it. If you did, leave a like, maybe leave a comment, and I'll see you in the next video.